What's good, APUS? I'm Christian Abweg.
And I'm Treyball Slater.
And our year was 1967. Formally, the fashion in the pop culture was a recap of the 1950s and a glimpse of the 1970s. But all in all, 1967 actually had very significant events that distinguished its year from the rest. From the very first Super Bowl to the tree-hugging hippies rising up against Vietnam, 1967 was one psychedelic and all-American hell of a year. Like all classic old-day crazy fun came drag racing. This was the era where the symbol for American muscle came to stand out. Very significant cars such as the Chevrolet Camaro, Ford 1967 Fairlane, Ford Falcor, Ford Mustang, Ford Thunderbird, Mercury Cougar, Pontiac Bonneville, Pontiac Firebird, and Pontiac Grand Prix came to rise. The model Twiggy fashioned from England and came to the U.S., where she adopted the style of short miniskirts and skimpy dresses. She was called Twiggy due to her abnormally skinny figure. This propelled many young girls into modeling after Twiggy. The essence of Twiggy's physique caused teenage girls and models to desperately acquire the body as well. This caused a tragic rise in anorexia, bulimia, and other eating disorders. Basically, in 1967, fashion fell in love with the women's leg. Women took advantage of the extra leg room by pulling on some colored or patterned hose. Other sexy articles were fishnets, spider weaves, and lace. The purpose of the belt is to hold up your pants, right? But in 67, the primary use of the belt was strictly for flare and wear only, meaning it was for show. In men's fashion, turtleneck sweaters were of great importance, also eliminating the need for a tie.
The first ATM was also put into service. On television, the following shows were big hits back in 1967. Beverly Hillbillies, Star Trek, Bewitched, Batman, I Dream of Jeannie, The Green Hornet, Gilligan's Island, and The Andy Griffin Show, Bonanza, and Gunsmoke, and Peanuts.
This time I'm gonna kick that football clear to the moon!
Also in this time period, Congress created PBS. General Mills flourished as the average American breakfast: Cheerios, Wheaties, Kix, Trix, Cocoa Puffs, and Lucky Charms. Fast food also dominated pop culture in 67 and started the whole mess of America is the #1 leading country in obesity and caloric intake.
Music in 1967. What better way to remember the classics by simply listening to music? The Beatles released their album Sgt. Pepper's, which began the whole revolution of concept albums, which would contain a main theme while all the songs revolved around it. Other iconic symbols such as the Rolling Stones and Elvis Presley propelled the idea of sex, drugs, money, and rock and roll. They were the main idols towards the teenage culture in 67. Van Morrison wrote Brown Eyed Girl, Pink Floyd had their first concert, and The Who introduced the fad of smashing instruments on stage. That's pretty rock and roll, right? Now, time to listen to some of these music. Hit that, Treyball.
And stops my mind from wondering where it will go. He goes downstairs to the kitchen, clutching a handkerchief. For the benefit of Mr. Kite, there will be a show tonight on trampoline. The Hendersons will all be there. Later, Pablo Frank is there. When I get older, losing my hair may by the old school. I read the news today, oh boy. 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire. Though the holes were rather small.
Hey, where did we go? Days when the rains came down in the hollow, playing a new game.
"1967 was a really good year for sports. Muhammad Ali rose to the world championship level in heavyweight boxing and won the division title numerous times, though he was later stripped of his title when he refused to be inducted to the U.S. Army for the Vietnam War. The first Super Bowl was played on January 15th, and it was the Green Bay Packers versus the Kansas City Chiefs. The Packers won, led by legendary head coach Vince Lombardi, 35-10. A major highlight for both America and women was Catherine Switzer, who became the first woman to run in the Boston Marathon. The St. Louis Cardinals would go on to beat the Boston Red Sox in the World Series of 1967, 4-3. The American Basketball Association begins to play as a rival to the National Basketball Association. In the NBA, the Philadelphia 76ers beat the San Francisco Warriors 4-2.
One of the most major and national issues that impacted American society back in 1967 was the Vietnam War. In March of '67, the U.S. aid to South Vietnam was increased by $150 million to bring the total to $700 million for the year. By the end of 1967, 486,000 U.S. military personnel in Vietnam were deployed. The war was usually seen as useless by many, actually by the majority of the U.S. Americans. So this propelled many hippies and all those peace-loving people to go against the war. So on October 21st, 1967, one of the most prominent anti-war demonstrations took place. 100,000 gathered at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., while 30,000 marched at the Pentagon later that night. As a result to rising tension, with so many people there was eventually a brutal confrontations with National Guard soldiers and U.S. Marshals. 638 civilians were sent to jail that night. Many people were so desperate and were so against the war that they would literally leave and run away to neighboring countries or hide even in the country against the Vietnam War. Like the Vietnam War, one of the most prominent agendas on the government's list was the famous space race with the Soviet Union. This event sparked a large boost in American nationalism. On February 21st, 1967, NASA launched its first lunar mission, Apollo 1. For anyone who does not know of the Apollo 1 mission, the object was to send 3 astronauts in a very tightly cramped space pod up to the moon for 14 days. Unfortunately, the mission could not commence due to a cabin fire during a rehearsal run on January 27th. All 3 crew members died in the fire. Following up Apollo 1's tragic failure came the success of Apollo 7. The mission lasted for 10 days with no sense of harm or technical difficulty. Because both the US and the Soviets were racing for interstellar dominance, this brought extreme paranoia and uneasiness within the countries. In theory, if one nation dominated space, that meant an opening for weapons of mass destruction. In result to the fear, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 was employed. It recognized and stated the common interest of all mankind in the progress of the exploration and use of space. This became a way to soften up tensions and form cooperational situations. The Lunar Orbiter program was a series of 5 unmanned lunar orbiter missions launched by the United States intended to help select Apollo landing sites by mapping the moon's surface. All 5 missions were a complete success. In 925 Square, black area of San Francisco in the summer, American culture was basically divided. It almost became impossible to resist the lure of ecstasy. The summer was billed as the summer of love. Summer of Love thrusted a new kind of music, acid rock. Barbers were nearly put out of business due to hippies growing out their hair all the way straight to their knees. The Summer of Love revived the outdoor gatherings of the Messianic age. The Summer of Love turned sex with strangers into a mode of generosity. LSD, mushrooms, and heroin became more widespread, while marijuana remained popular as usual. As drugs became more prominent, psychedelic art and music became a result. There was psychedelic rock, which broke with traditional rock and hit the roots for experimental rock genres in the future. Drugs were utilized as a way to escape the horrors and reality of the life then. By the way, almost forgot to add this, but drug dealing sparked rapidly, obviously, as people realized how big the demand was for them.
In the court case Loving v. Virginia, the Supreme Court ruled that interracial marriages were indeed legal and that it would not hinder any political or employment statuses. The term Black Power was coined by the SNCC during a speech in Seattle. Numerous race riots were in New York and Detroit. On July 23rd, 7,000 National Guard troops were brought in to restore peace and to stop the riots that were occurring in the streets of Detroit. The song Respect was recorded and released by Aretha Franklin, and it supported nationalism and feminism for women. It would later become the national anthem for women's rights. In conclusion, 1967 was a revolutionary year for many aspects. The first Super Bowl was played. The space race progressed significantly. The Summer of Love would go on to change American culture. More drugs rose to prominence. Music was interchanging. Momentous TV shows came on during this time. Remarkable muscle cars came out, which some are memorable to this day. The Vietnam War persisted, and the civil rights became more defined. Without the events of 1967, America would not be the way it is today.